What makes you think you have the right to leave this family? Family is everything. When you don't have family, you don't have anything else. Who do you think you are looking for a new life and trying to get into a relationship? I don't like her. I don't like him. She's not good enough for you. He's not good enough for you. Find somebody else. Don't you leave this family. When you get married, it's not just you that's getting married. It is me, your siblings, your father, even your adopted brother and sister. Don't you ever think you're separate from us. Oh, that was hard to act out. And one of the reasons why it was hard is because that was the ending of a session that I had done as an amateur in the field. I had just graduated college and I was in graduate school learning. And when I went to my place of work where I had been interning, I met with this family and they were a very, very strict Amish family. And the dynamic was interesting because everything meant family to them. You weren't allowed to walk away. You weren't allowed to have a free thinking space. Critical thinking was diluted or minimized. There was a lot of gaslighting in this family, a lot of emotional and psychological trauma. And I ended up, unfortunately, losing the family, and they never came back to therapy after that session. I sat there and I just felt like I wanted to cry because there was nothing I could do to help my client who was 17 years old. The only thing I could tell her to do is as soon as you turn 18, get a good job, get into a school program, and have your life the way that you need to have your life. She really was the product of an organized family system that very much felt like a cult. Organized groups are often known to want to dominate and control. And in order for them to dominate and control, they have to have your consent, your support, and your vulnerability. Groups of psychological abuse, and it's typically an acronym, which is GPA. So groups of psychological abuse, here it is on the screen. It is basically the organized group of individuals who share a common theme and they feel that they have something that's in common. 1% of our population is impacted by GPA. And the sad part about it is a cult is usually something that happens outside the family, right? Something that you get into politically, religiously, based on your belief system. But when you're looking at a family situation, the impact of a family that is dysfunctional and toxic can take you down for the rest of your life. The other piece of this is a family that has a cult-like disposition is on the path of destruction because it's going to take your ability to think. It's going to steal your identity. It's going to put fear in you. You may also notice that you are not emotionally connected to the members of your family. The only reason why you are connected to your family is because of fear of leaving, because of isolation, because of fear of the external outside world, and because of anxiety around not being able to see your family ever again. So there's something known as the authoritarian leadership style. And this is basically a dynamic that can exist within a family where there's one individual, maybe it's your psychopathic, cold, callous, unemotional father, right? And so he's the authoritarian leadership person within the family where he isolates everybody and causes you to withdraw. He really causes you to lose this sense of self. There's suppression of critical thinking and of who you are. And he welcomes you in a sense, maybe not verbally, but passive aggressively to challenge the way of the family so that he can tell you that you're wrong, the outside world is scary, and you're never going to leave. Right? So there's often suppression of critical thinking skills. You're not allowed to process reality. That's not what he wants you to do. There's often a pattern of distrust and dependency. When you are dependent, you're never going to go anywhere, right? When you're dependent financially, you can't leave. When you're dependent because of a disability or a psychological disability, you're dependent, and he knows that. So the authoritarian leadership style plays off of your isolation, your disability, and your vulnerability. And there's no ability to think critically. So you are really at the mercy of your thinking patterns. You are really at the mercy of this authoritarian parental style that puts you in a box. It cramps you, right? Family dysfunction and family toxicity makes its members weak, right? You lose who you are and you lose who you can be. Now, if we throw in here Dr. Lagone, he's a psychologist that studies cults and groups. He basically says this, that you have to have what's called a loving distance in order for that relationship to exist. You must have a loving distance. And that is personal space versus shared space. In personal space, right, you have your ability to enjoy life in the ways that you see it. Connect to the things that you want to connect to. Do the things that you want to do that empowers you and turbocharges you, right? You have all of that in personal space. Shared space means that I have my individuality, but you can also join me. And according to Dr. Lagone, that this is a really important piece of the puzzle. You have to have a loving distance. When you don't have a loving distance from that person who is controlling you, or you don't have a loving distance from people that are close to you, even if they're being healthy with you, or even if there's a healthy relationship, you're not going to be able to survive that, because you have to have a loving distance. There has to be personal space and shared space. And when you are in a dysfunctional family, there is never going to be shared space or personal space. Let me also mention here that there's going to be the severing of ties with an external support system. So you're not going to be able to see your grandparents because your controlling authoritarian parents has decided to cut ties with your grandparents. You don't know grandma, you don't know grandpa, right? You're never going to get a chance to see your aunt and uncles, or your cousins, or your in-laws, because this authoritarian, controlling, dominating person has severed those ties. You're not going to be able to talk to teachers. You're not going to be able to talk to friends. You're not going to be able to talk to neighbors, because that's an external system that can then become a support system. And what happens when you have a support system? You have them talking to you and giving you perceptions of reality, right? And it's a certain way that the brain kind of works when it is in connection with other people. You have somebody else talking to you about your situation. They may disagree with how you're seeing it. They may also highlight that something is wrong here. And you may leave them, and later in the day, as you're taking a shower, as you're eating dinner, as you're getting ready for bed, you may have these thoughts pop up in your head that is questioning everything that has happened in your family up until that point. And so that person has gotten into your head, right? And this is what an authoritarian personality style, if you will, does not want you to experience. So if you feel like your family is like a cult and you want to figure out what the dynamic is to test it and see if this was your dynamic, then you definitely want to keep on watching. I never like to talk about cults because I always feel like they are the most evil. They are the most evil system in the world. They take your mind, they mold your mind, they look for your vulnerabilities. It's almost like putting your brain on an examining table, and they take your brain, they put it on a table, they go through all of its emotional and psychological chambers, and you're going to get all your secrets extracted from you, and you're not going to have privacy. You're not going to know who you are. Your emotions are going to change. And there's going to be a period of time where you just feel like, you know what, I feel so loved and cared for in this cult and in this dynamic. It feels good, so I think I'm going to stay here. Once you make that decision to stay, that's when the abuse begins. The abuse has already begun, which is one of the reasons why you're in the cult or in the family dynamic like this in the first place. It's okay to love your family. It's okay to want to be attached to them. But when you find yourself depending on them emotionally and psychologically, and any and everything that they do to you goes, and it's an okay, that's a problem. That's when you know that you are in bondage. You can't stand up for yourself. You can't speak up for yourself. You can't disagree with anyone. You've got to go with the flow. Most of the time, when we're talking about dysfunctional families that are very much similar to a cult, we're talking about what's called objectification. And what that means is the person in your family who is the cult leader, quote unquote, they know how to objectify you. They make you an object. They make you a thing. And there's no respect, love, and compassion that is connected to their relationship with you. It's a control and dominance thing. One of the things that I have found, and this is an interesting dynamic here, when it comes to these individuals, is that you find that there's an absence of reliability and goodwill. There's an absence of reliability and goodwill. You're also going to have a really hard time escaping from that dynamic, because the responsibility of their feelings and their hurt and what they're going to think of you when you leave, that is placed upon you. So now you're carrying that heavy burden, the heavy burden that I talked about right here in this video. I'm going to post it up here for you. Once this video ends, go ahead and check that out if you missed it. But you're going to start to feel a burden and responsibility. Can you believe that some families are like that? If you've experienced, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? If you've experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They sit you down, they ask a bunch of questions, they figure out your hot buttons, they figure out who you are, and next thing you know, they're manipulating you, harming you, and using your vulnerabilities against you. Usually when you are in a family dynamic that is cult-like, you ready for this? You may also join a cult. Why? Why would I go outside of a cult that feels like my, family, right? Like I'm already in a family where the dynamic is cult-like. Why would I go find another cult? Here's why. You're broken, you're sad, you're depressed, you're needy. And the first thing most people turn to when they're needy, they're vulnerable, they're heartbroken, they're frustrated, is a cult. They don't recognize it as a cult at first. They recognize it as Jehovah's Witnesses. They recognize it as really Orthodox Christianity, right? It is sometimes called spiritual awakening. You have those real vague terms. So a lot of times when you're coming from a dysfunctional family dynamic, you may run to these places seeking an identity and comfort and love and acceptance. And that's exactly what the cult gives you. Sometimes the family dynamic, you will get people come up to you, aunts, nephews, cousins, your mom, your dad, and say things like, "Don't you want this too? Why would you go against us? Don't you want family?" That's exactly what happens in a cult when you want to walk away. The moment you want to walk away is the moment when you're going to start seeing the claws come out, the fangs come out, right? The disrespect, the list just goes on. It's a very unhealthy, toxic position to be in. And the only reason I know that is because I've counseled people who have been in cults before. It is scary. There's also psychological strain and isolation. Of course you would be psychologically strained and isolated. There's a lot going on in this kind of a dynamic, right? And it can make you feel afraid. It can make you feel incompetent. In fact, it can terrify you because some family members highly engage themselves in satanic involvement, right? They do spells, they do all kind of, mock spiritual seances. The list goes on. You may also notice in this dynamic poor boundaries. If you don't have proper boundaries, then you get sucked into their coalitions and their alliances and their groupiness and their clique, right? And they ostracize you socially and they push you over there because they want nothing to do with you. Now, let me talk about the elements of a cult briefly, okay? The number one element is recruitment. They got to go after you, right? And once they go after you, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for vulnerability. Here are the stages right here on the screen. They're looking for vulnerability, for isolation, for connection, with the established social networks. You're not going to be able to connect with anybody outside of a cult. You know, you got to remain on the inside, right? And so they're going to try to establish a really strong connection with you within the group, because that's just who they are. That's what they do. There's a forming of a traumatic bond, right? And usually this is indoctrination. When you are indoctrinated and filled with lies, they attempt to control you, right? And they really try to push you to change who you are, or to leave what you do, or to leave who you are, so that they can then take you over, right? There is something known as unfreezing. Unfreezing is what causes you to discredit who you are, and you begin to lose a certain faith within yourself. It's a very sad and very dysfunctional dynamic, to say the least. There's a changing of your character where you kind of replace old beliefs and identity with the cult's identity, right? There's also creating of dependency. You're nothing without us, right? Remember at the very beginning, I said, you're nothing without this family, or something to that effect. And that is because that is the mentality of a family that is dysfunctional and enmeshed. Also, in the process of developing a cult, there's a new identity. We call that refreezing. And that's when there's this establishing of a new identity through reinforcement, right? It's reinforced over and over within that cult that you belong here, that this is who you are now, right? There's what we call authoritarian loyalty, where there's unwavering support for the leader of that cult. And that could be your father, that could be your mother, that could be your evil grandparents. There's a loss of self. I don't know who I am anymore. And there's tons of fear and anxiety that's instilled. And once you get sucked up into that dynamic, it's really hard. All right, so what's the impact on you? The impact is major, because anytime you're in a cult, a family dynamic that feels like a cult, it's going to be really hard for you to test your reality. So the first thing, and research backs this up, the first thing that I see when I'm dealing with a dysfunctional family that's like a cult is you often feel it's really difficult to trust other people. You're constantly going to have to test your reality. You're going to have to try to unwire those skewed and distorted ways of reality that your family has kind of pushed upon you. It's going to be really hard to look around and accept who you really are, and accept your perception, of reality when you have been so beat up, right? And you have been so emotionally and psychologically controlled. There's 100% fear of abandonment. You know, cults really operate on vulnerability, and you may have squeezed really tightly and grabbed tightly onto certain family members. And in the process of doing that, it may be really hard to kind of pry your hands off of them. And so, you know, you may have some fear of abandonment because you don't want them to leave, and you don't want to feel that lonely hole in your heart ever again. There's complex PTSD that can happen. There is, because of the repeated trauma, there is also a normalization of what's going on. Dad didn't mean that. Dad just loves us. Mom didn't mean to parentify us. She just really loved us and wanted us to influence our younger siblings in a good way. So there's a lot of making up of excuses, and it may not be yours. It could be a sibling or another family member, but there's this constant making up of excuses for these individuals, right? You may find that you don't have a safety plan. You have no idea how to get out of this dynamic. You feel overwhelmed. You feel stuck. You feel trapped. You feel misused. You feel hurt, right? You don't know how to get out. There's alliances and coalitions within your family, and you've been kind of socially ostracized and pushed to the curb. And so what do you do when you've been socially ostracized? You kind of sometimes stay in the corner and you cry, and you develop this fear or anxiety around speaking up for yourself. And that's going to happen to you in this dynamic as well. There may be an inability to acknowledge that there's a problem. You know deep down there's a problem, but it's a defense mechanism to try to push it out of your mind, to try to force a different shape or image to your past and your history, right? That is really scary. It's a defense mechanism. It's denial. It's repression. It's avoidance. It's really hard to accept that this is the way some people are, and this is the way some family dynamics are, right? You may also notice that there is a disengagement from everyone. You're not really isolating because you may have to work around people or shop, and the list goes on, but you really are disengaging. You're not putting your energy into developing relationships, to maintaining relationships, to showing love and affection, right? And you disengage sometime because there's a lack of identity. This family dynamic has taken, right, and snatched your identity away from you. And so now you've got to figure out, how do I find myself again? How do I define myself? What am I good at? What am I not good at? Right? And it's a really scary and confusing dynamic. You also may find that you feel this deep need to serve the family dynamic. You don't know why, but you feel like you need to serve the family dynamic. And that means pushing yourself to the back, embracing your family, and continuing to be abused and abused and abused. Join me on Friday and Saturday live as I talk more about this family dynamic, and check out this video right up here. I talked about this a little differently in a previous video. I hope to see you on the weekend. Bye-bye.